Hi, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of the TechTrends podcast. We're here kicking this off. Pretty excited about this. I'm joined by my co-host, Gene, as well. We just got back from IT Nation. A lot of buzz, a lot of noise. Gene, anything crazy exciting that you found there?
Just a lot of friends. Yeah, it was a lot. I mean, you always come back from those conferences. And I think that as vendors, we have to remember that this is also true with our fellow customers and leads that are in the MSP space, that it's fun, but it's exhausting, and everyone's got high hopes and can defeat the world with all of the tooling possible. And then they come back to work and then they have to, reset passwords, fix printers, reconfigure Azure, whatever, and it's reality hits, right?
Yep, 100%. Right. And I think from my end too, it's always, oh, wow, I saw that. That's so new. That's so shiny. It's so cool. Let's dive into it. Oh, but wait, we still got 3 months left of the year. So there's actual work to be done here before we can start.
Well, yeah, and it's 3 months left in the year, but with holidays and PTOs, I mean, that's a real thing too. I don't know anyone out there, if you have vacation struggle at the end of the year. A lot of people who haven't opted in for a vacation and realize that with a ticking time bomb towards January 1st and realize that they have to take off 2 weeks of vacation, which is not obviously possible if everyone's on vacation, if you're an MSP. So
yeah,
gets extra spicy.
Yep, absolutely. Right. And I think that too, that whole holiday freeze notion is one of the things that's interesting, right? Because that's a good time for us to talk about what we want to, because everyone's thinking about what's next, what's in 2025. And we're here to talk to the community today about what we think we believe will move the needle for MSPs in 2025 in terms of technology and where technology will mature, where specific trends will mature, as well as our own picks in terms of what we think will help move the needle for the MSP industry the most.
Yeah, so, and I'm super excited, Cam, because in my experience, this is the industry, but the industry has such an influence on the small, medium-sized business tech ecosystem. So I think it's oftentimes we don't realize that these are companies focused on early adoption and moving the needle for their customers for whatever reason, whether it's a threat or to innovate and to offer a more compelling service or product to their customers. And that brings the tech into SMB. And at IT Nation, it's a pretty global conference. So you have people from all over the world looking at the same sets of innovation that we are going to be talking about today. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that raises a good point, right? With things like Shopify, right? The whole drop shipping concept, everyone became a small business, right? And now with things like GPT and the power of generative AI, one man can run a business, right? One person can run a business, but there needs to be a technology backbone supporting it too. So with more and more of these mom and pop shops popping up, the MSPs definitely have a lot of opportunity, but also a lot of opportunity to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't wait to get deeper into some AI products going into next year. They were out in full effect, and there's always a difference between my drying unit for my clothes that has an AI dry cycle. I always joke that I don't actually think that that's using AI, but it's great marketing, and oftentimes I'm like, why not? We'll just use that setting. Versus, people creating very compelling products of cost savings or efficiency or automation that are allowing MSPs to become more profitable or allowing them to work with their customers in a way that's providing a better experience or both, right? I mean, that's kind of the goal.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So today, this podcast is brought to you by Traceless and AlertOps. So we're your hosts. I'm Cam Srikanth. I'm a product manager here at AlertOps, and I'm joined by Gene, my co-host from Traceless.
Yeah, and it's great. I mean, shout out to Pitch It and Sean over there. I think that's really what brought us together. We both have the legacy of winning Pitch It as companies, right? And you were the person that they shoved on stage to present, right? So shout out to you for doing that and taking home the gold.
Yeah, definitely. The incubator program, it's been awesome if outside of even winning, right? Just the fact that we get to interface, right? That we connected and there's now more opportunities and things to engage with. So I think that was awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So let's jump into how this is going to work, right? Each host is going to make 5 picks. We will be serving one IT Nation as well as our existing kind of customers of MSPs to kind of figure out exactly where they believe technology is headed and what trends they think will move the needle the most for the MSP ecosystem within 2025. We'll come back to you once we have the results of said surveys, and we're going to compare predictions. So we're going to try to rank based on what we hear from the community, ourselves, as well as a few trusted partners, and then declare who we think the most accurate draft pick was for 2024.
Yeah, and if you're watching this or listening, moving forward, we're open to suggestions. So if there's something not on this list you think we missed the ball, or if there's a product that you would like us to do a deep dive on, we're happy to do that. I mean, that's part of the fun of doing something like this, is to really nerd out on tools and talk about what's happening in that area of the ecosystem.
Yeah, 100%. So let's go ahead and take a look at what some of these categories actually are, right? So the product categories here, the first one, MRR maximization through sales frameworks and recurring revenue models, right? So in terms of a trend or a product category, I think that I personally have definitely seen over the last 3-4 years a substantial uptick in terms of sales tools for MSPs and new sales frameworks that are being presented. I don't know, Gene, do you think that's the case from your end as well?
Yeah, the early day, I remember it was like 10 or 12 years ago, I was a member of True Methods. And for me, it was really like, hey, this is what MRR looks like, right? And I think there's a lot of people who go through that evolution of break fix or product heavy, or maybe a printing business or another kind of related, like VoIP or something like that. And then going into this and really learning like, what is MRR? How do you package and price it? And then there's like step 2 and 3, which I think is what we're talking about, is how to really grow that revenue and optimize it for margin. So it's kind of like the next version of those things. So definitely a lot going on there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think too, it's easy for us, right? A lot of the times I have conversations, and I'm guilty of this, and I've seen other vendors doing it too. When MSPs are trying to move to that recurring revenue model, we're analyzing it from the perspective of a vendor, and a lot of the times a SaaS vendor, right? So we live and breathe MRR and ARR. Recurring revenue is kind of the core basis of SaaS as a model. So understanding some of the struggles from someone that's completely migrating through a different revenue cycle, I think, is something that as vendors, we should definitely keep in mind as well.
Yeah, agreed.
And obviously, you see AI in a few places here, right? So the number 2 and 3 are really kind of go through, once we can figure out what MRR maximization is, right? Using AI for lead gen or cybersecurity certification standards implementation. That's obviously been around for quite some time. And then we've got threat detection and response, identity-based specifically. And so these, I think, are fairly standard, but also standard pillars of what MSPs offer as services, which is why, irrespective of whether they've existed or not, that additional innovation here, I think, would be useful, right? Everyone has an EDR or an XDR or a SIM or a SOAR in some capacity or another, right? Now, if that product matures, what does that look like to help MSPs? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, absolutely. We're pretty passionate about identity. We kind of feel like it's at least currently, the final frontier as we move away from networks, local networks. So that's a big one for me. And I'll tell you that we tried an AI BDR service, and I think it was great in concept, but didn't really pan out. So I think that's the dream, right?
Yeah,
doing robot stuff, but I'm skeptical on some of these things.
And I think rightfully so, right? Which brings us to 6, hyper automation. Everyone's using RPA and AI. There's so many cool automation tools that exist within the ecosystem, and so many that are focused on specific niches and expand out. So it's automation plugging into automation. And now how can we inject AI into the mix, right? An interesting but scary concept to think about, that AI is going to command your RMM to run a particular script on a device or set of devices. Sounds great in theory, but is a little scary. What are your thoughts on that one, Jin?
Yeah, I think it's kind of reminds me of like, with great power comes great responsibility, right? So you've seen early day, like people who just plugged in ChatGPT to website chatbots, and somebody gamed them to basically give them a free flight or something crazy where, the system wasn't tested. And I feel like the general vibe on AI is that we're going to be testing it first before like regulation and law comes out around how to protect us as consumers or businesses. So it sounds great, but yeah, high stakes, a reward.
Percent. And then the going down the list, right? The last few are rather straightforward. I know that cloud infrastructure management as well as optimization has been huge, right? From everything in terms of monitoring desktops, MDM, right? There's been a lot of progress there, and also ancillary tools like Azure or AWS or GCP that provide more accessible functionality. So I think that that's definitely been an area of maturity that I've personally seen. And then same thing with RMM and security solutions. They've been around for forever, but better integrations as well as a more streamlined approach of one implementation, but also maintenance and upgrades. Do you think that that would move the needle a little bit, or do you think that that's pretty mature as it exists today?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting concept that the industry has gone through. So I think you have like early day, and again, we're moving quickly here, but like early day was about let's buy a bunch of companies and combine them, right? And so ConnectWise was a huge early adopter of this with their modern office suite. That's when I started using ConnectWise. And Kaseya just announced Kaseya One, which is a huge group of bundled products. So from my perspective, is going to continue to grow. And then you have vendors who are basically startups doing all of those things. So they're saying like, we're not taking 7 pieces of legacy technology and putting them together. We're basically building all of them and rightfully advertising very integrated, single pane of glass for everything that you need or everything that your techs need. I do feel though that there is an unbundling event coming in the next few years, right? I think MSPs are running from certain companies and don't want all their eggs in one basket, right? So I think it's just a very interesting dynamic of how things are moving. So yeah, all these things. Very interesting.
Yeah, I mean that like movement, like you mentioned, right? The whole unbundling concept is something that is near and dear to my heart, specifically because I think that from a product perspective and a product maturity perspective and a value driving perspective, that if your product is purpose built to do functions A, B, and C, and we solve D, E, and F business problems, that's something that's very clear, and that's something that your entire team is working towards. Right. But the second that we say, hey, A through Z, we got everything, then there's going to be less focus on the maturity of each one of the pieces of functionality. Right. So I think that oftentimes the bundling in terms of offering a comprehensive suite is awesome, but organizations sometimes don't have the infrastructure to support it and keep developing on some of those products, right? So I definitely think that's interesting from both ends. So next, we've got a few more that are based on more admin, right? Admin and business process. So process automation specifically for administrative tasks and operations, things like I'm thinking time entries, right? Things like possibly detecting for any on-site visits, how to sequence them, maybe based on the traffic patterns or weather patterns or things like that, right? That's just one area, but then just generically too, from a billing cycle perspective, or alternatively from a compliance perspective, are there more routine tasks from a business administration perspective that you think, Gene, that we would be able to see some advances in this year?
Yeah, and I think people are really starting to capture the power of a global worker economy. And so I think a lot of these tasks, when defined, they need to be done on a schedule, but anywhere and by whomever can accomplish these, 100%. So I think on top of applications and software that kind of help with some of these tasks, I feel like some MSPs are really looking abroad to maximize their resources for their business.
Yeah, 100%. And then we've got number 10, right? Financial planning and growth valuation. I know that a lot of companies and partners that I've personally spoken to is that, hey, yeah, we've been running this MSP. We were focused on getting to a recurring revenue model. Now we're X million in recurring revenue, and I don't know what the process of an exit looks like, or I don't know if this is a fair valuation, or I don't even know how to value my organization. So this is something that's interesting that I don't know that technology is going to solve this problem as much as education, but I do think it's something that's integral here.
Yeah, I think it's, we're seeing this area of the MSP space really mature. I think any MSP that's been around for a minute or a software vendor has constantly been bombarded by private equity BDRs trying to figure out, if that's a deal they can get onto or make an intro. And I think MSPs are realizing that if you take care of certain objectives prior to that, then you'll be more successful at that late tenure. And I think you also see a lot of MSPs that are merging, right? Instead of taking on some sort of private equity funds. So it's cool. And what I've seen overall is that there's no one way that you can be successful. I see a lot of people doing many different things, and it's great. It's great to have options.
Yep, 100%. And then we got the last one, right? So what we've talked about AI in a few different places. AI consulting and training to target new revenue streams is more so concepts of learning how to use AI effectively, right? How can MSPs monetize AI as a service or specific pieces of AI in a particular line of business that they can implement or alternatively maintain for other businesses as a service, right? I think that, like you said, it's new, it's fancy, there's not regulation, but not many people also have an idea of how we can make money off of this, right?
Totally.
It's awesome that GPT can help clean up my grammar mistakes, but at the same time, is that going to make me money? Is that going to optimize my business? What efficiencies can I realize as a byproduct of implementation?
Yeah, and also like newsflash, I don't think the big players know how to make money off of AI yet.
Yeah.
I think there's maybe some offshore cost center or call center type workers that will provide efficiency and optimization, and they're using AI to like make their own businesses better. But what are the consumers buying from them as a product? And besides like a membership to ChatGPT or Copilot, and again, I don't even see that those are like people screaming at the top of their lungs, I need this and running to it. So I think that we'll get to find, right? And I think that this time next year, we're probably going to see a lot more vendors in that area of this space in the pavilion.
Yeah, 100%. Cool. So let's jump into it, right? Gene, I think you're up. You want to go through your picks and kind of walk us through exactly like what your thought process was, why you think that these items will help move the needle in 2025?
Yeah, absolutely, man. So I think, at the top of the list for me has just been automation in general. And the general vibe from the vendors are, instead of automating something with the script, you're automating processes, right? So think about a user onboarding or a customer onboarding where maybe, 8 to 10 systems, each with their own settings, need to be configured and changed, and automating that entire process. And there's some very robust use cases, and it's also a very compelling sell for an MSP to gain efficiency for a somewhat lower cost. So I think that, this might be on your list too, but I think it's a hot topic, the hottest of topics. The security stuff and standards implementation, I think it was interesting. CompTIA has been such an advocate of the community, and they had their Trustmark accreditation come out, which has been widely adopted. And I think it's really useful for MSPs to just know what good looks like and be able to benchmark off of that. When you start talking about why is it important for MSPs to implement other standards and benchmarks for their customers, and I think regulation is increasing, right? And I could tell you that selling somebody a service when they have to have it is a lot easier than telling somebody that they should do something because it's good for their business, right? Yeah. It's a different sell. And so I think that having positioning where you can be in that place is really useful. So for me, these are big ones. And also finding good people and having people upskilled is such a challenging thing, right? So I think this is right in line with that.
100%. I think too, like in terms of the education piece, we saw a drastic uptick, if I'm not mistaken. I was reading, I want to say almost over 2 years ago, that there was a substantial uptick in individuals receiving cybersecurity certification. So for a brief second there were too many cybersecurity professionals and not enough jobs. But as threats, as well as breaches, as well as overall the cybersecurity posturing of any malicious actors have gotten more and more aggressive, that the need is higher than ever. So I'm on board with that for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, like I was saying before, identity is really the last kind of perimeter, so to speak. And a lot of attacks start with people, right? And people tie into identity so closely. So I think that, and if you look at like the way Okta is positioning some of their products. And I think it's a very good sector for us to look at. Obviously, us being in that space, it was hard not to put number one, but I think it's still up and coming.
Understood. Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Number 4 for me, a lot of people talk about shadow IT and cost. Like, are we using these things? So I think that that's a pretty useful thing to have as an MSP if you're adding value or doing assessments. I mean, what if you could go to a customer and do a cloud assessment and find out that you can save them $10,000 a month and your fee is $6,000 a month? I mean, I think that that's the type of power we're talking about, in the waste of spend in cloud infrastructure.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you guys were a part of any, like Microsoft or Google or Amazon, like startup program, right? But the way that I've seen them is like, you can do this. I mean, I think Google had it, like you can use it for free for 3 years. Something it's like insane.
Yeah.
But then you got to pay up, and Microsoft is happy to award you more compute for free if you've used up all the stuff that they've given you. But that's to incentivize you to become stickier and spend more money with them, right? Yep, so this is one near and dear to my heart. And then
I like to personally tinker with Azure, AWS, and GCP all the time, right? And one of the things that I am consistently afraid of is, have I turned it off? On top of that, and have I been using these services as part of the corresponding app that I'm building? I think that me needing to jump into 3 different spots to truly understand how much I'm paying out of pocket is a problem. I think transparency in terms of cloud infrastructure pricing and where that stands in terms of your business goals is definitely huge.
Absolutely. And then the last one, MRR maximization, I think it's important for all the MSPs to run a healthy business. And a lot of these frameworks and groups are helping people really change their earning, which changes their lives. It's really incredible to see.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go jump into mine here. I think that a lot of ours are actually like pretty close, right? In terms of at least where we think the industry needs to grow, or alternatively where we think the industry can see value from a lot of this. So the first one for me is hyperautomation using RPA, AI, and workflow orchestration, right? Now, that might be a little bit biased because AlertOps specifically plays within a niche corner of that RPA and incident response space. So from that perspective, we have a lot of things that I'm seeing can drive enormous value now as a byproduct of, and I hate to use the term AI, but AI, right? So even if we want to say it's at base level, some level of machine learning that we have, that's fine, right? But one way or another, the fact that we can more easily identify trends to launch workflows in very specific capacities, right? That we shouldn't let it run wild, but in specific capacities with repeatable success, I think the hyperautomation will substantially alleviate the amount of effort an individual technician needs to put into routine tasks.
Yeah, so an MSP has these things and they benchmark it to show their customers. What do you think's the best move? Hey, we did this work and you didn't have to, and it's a higher number? Or we did this work and it only took this amount of time and it's a lower number? Like, how do you think MSPs need to represent this this benefit to their customers?
I mean, I think it's interesting, right? I think that in the case that we say, hey, we did A, B, and C work, and it took this much effort on the higher end, right? That's one, more billable hours, potentially more revenue from project work. I think that from a business perspective, that makes sense. But at the same time, I think it's a double-edged sword because from a customer's perspective, they are not aware of, I don't want to say easy, but how possible changes, upgrades, or downgrades are. Right? So they want to stick to the status quo because we've said, hey, it took us all this work to get here. So in theory, it could be positioning it as more business, but also preventing the customer from being comfortable enough to reapproach and say, hey, I want to switch things up. So I think that's an interesting question. I honestly would not be able to answer that 100%. I think I'm right in the middle there.
Yeah, I'm not sure myself, but anyway, that's just a good.
So then the second one here, right? AI consulting and training. I think that this was really going back to what you said, Gene. We don't know how to make money on this yet, right? It's out there, it's cool, it's flashy, but we have no clue whether we can actually monetize it or how to monetize it. And I think that a majority of us are in the same boat, and there's a couple of players that have done a reasonable job at figuring it out that are generally more on the infrastructure side, right? Or platform as a service side rather than software as a service side. So I think that it'd be very interesting as well as offer a completely new revenue stream for MSPs. So I think that that could be huge in 2025. Next one, AI-powered lead generation, conversion optimization. So I think that there's a lot of this that a lot of tools do an awesome job of, right? We've got, obviously, the big guys. You've got your Salesforces, and now you've got the HubSpots, and more relevant in the MSP industry, right? You have tools like GlassHive or your PSAs that have the CRM capabilities integrated. So a lot of these already automate things like sequences, campaigns, open rates, and track your numbers. Now, with that said, though, how can we leverage AI to push that automation forward? So based on XYZ campaigns and email opens, if it was able to intelligently route them to a different subset or possibly a drip campaign, I think that being able to react or have a machine react to consumer actions and consumer sentiment as a byproduct of trends that you analyze from your own content will be pretty huge in 2025. And then MRR maximization through sales frameworks and recurring revenue models, right? We've talked about this, and I'll be the first one to admit I am a techie, right? I think that the sales side of the business never really came easily to me. So it's a constant reminder to myself that, okay, yeah, oh no, we're actually selling this. You got to ask for money at some point, and as well as positioning how we ask for money, right? So I think that a lot of people in our space and a lot of partners I've talked to struggle with the sales side of things. So I think that more elaborate and consistent training and frameworks would definitely be beneficial.
Yeah, and I think that we just came out of a phase where every MSP had to go to their customers and say, hey, guess what? Things are going to be better, but it's going to cost more, right? Mm-hmm. And doing that dance of, do I include it in my bundle and not increase that price, or do I put it on the side? And I think it was really hard for a lot of MSPs, right? Because the customers are like, what do you mean? Like, we haven't had a breach. So I don't know why you're trying to tell me I need to buy more stuff, right? Without having a framework or a way to really educate the customer to sell them on what they need. So I think that this is a really good one for all of us out there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then the last one, right? Financial planning, growth planning. The reason that I have this in here is because I think that this is something that's, once again, kind of near and dear to my heart. I follow the venture capital space and private equity space fairly closely and have a bit of a background in finance. So I follow this just generically, but based on the conversations that I've had with a lot of our partners, it is a big kind of separation between I am running the business versus I am evaluating the business, right?
Yep.
Because day to day, they're in it, right? They're in the trenches. It's one fire after another, and then they're focused on hitting their quarterly goals and annual goals, and then all of a sudden you've got a $7 million ARR MSP. Okay, great. What's my exit strategy? I have no clue. So I think that this would definitely, if not provide immediate exit plans, right? But it would at least give a long-term, right, a long-tail strategy for owner-operators to start thinking about how do we see ourselves in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years.
Yep, absolutely. And, I think it's interesting, even though this is fifth place for you, you love it so much you put it twice. So just, just I understand how difficult it is to value these things, but I got it.
Cool. So we're around. I appreciate you guys hopping on to our first episode of TechTrends podcast. We're excited to bring you more here in the pretty near future, but I really appreciate it. And I'm excited for this, Gene.
Yeah, I was just thinking, is it going to be weekly, monthly? It's, I think that was what somebody said to me, is that hey, as great as your product is, just remember that instead of 50 other people trying to sell to your customer, there's 500, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot out there. And I'd like to also suggest if people want to tell us we're wrong, what they think is most important, that'll kind of be the next one as we hop into next year, where we'll start getting in the weeds with some of these tools, given what the trends are. So I'm excited.
Yeah. Till the next one. Thanks,
All
everyone.
right, buddy. Thanks, Sam.